Hello ladies and gentlemen, my name is Nidhi Malavarpu. I am 9 years old and I have finished up 3rd grade at Heights Elementary. I am really enjoying my summer vacation as I just got a new puppy about a couple of weeks ago. So I would just like to thank Manisha Madhavan and Arnav Mankad for their awesome speeches. I learned a lot about the movie Fifth Wave. Maybe I'll watch it when I'm older. And I also learned a lot about HSS. It sounds like a really cool place where you can bond and work together, so I might go there sometime. So first off, can you guys hear me? Great. So today I want to talk to you about something. Well, it's history. Please do not groan. It's not boring at all. Trust me, this is gonna make your mind blow like that jet ad you see on TV. Today I'll be talking to you about Sharon. Not Sharon Needles, not Sharon Tate, not Sharon Osbourne. I'll be talking to you about the town of Sharon. There's a big difference between person and town. There's a lot of...
I have a question.
Yes.
Do you have some good people staying there?
Yes. The young man in the wonderful tuxedo said, "Do we have good people in Sharon?" Of course we do. There's me, there's British Uncle, and there's tons of other great people there, including you, Mom and Dad. Just saying. So today I'll be talking to you about Sharon, the town. Sharon has a lot of history, believe it or not. Like, so much. I think it's more than New York, believe it or not. There's things that will make you go crazy, as I said. So I'll talk to you about 3 things on Sharon. The first point I want to talk about today is Deborah Samson. What does Deborah Samson have to do with Sharon, you might ask? I mean, Deborah Samson, a worldwide known figure, in Sharon, a super small town, that's not even comparable. So what does it have to do with it? Well, you'll find out. The second point I want to talk about is Lake Massapog and Man's Pond. Lake Massapog and Man's Pond are famous for more than just swimming and diving. Third point I want to talk about is Sharon Historical Society. This place preserves a lot of history, and I really hope that you guys enjoy the Sharon Historical Society too. So let's start and let's begin and dive into the world of history of Sharon. Do you know when you're in a small town? You know when you're in a small town, when everyone knows the news before it's published, they just read it to see if the publisher got it right.
I didn't know that.
The first point I want to talk to you about today is Deborah Samson. First off, who is Deborah Samson? Just to give you a little back knowledge on her. Deborah Samson was a woman who fought in the Revolutionary War dressed as a man and went undercover as the name of Robert Shirtliff. Now, this sounds not that bad, right? But in those days, it was you would break the law, literally, if you went into the Revolutionary War, any war, just as a man. If you were a woman, you were literally breaking the law. Why did Deborah do this? She just wanted adventure. She could have gotten into jail, or she could have gotten disgraced. Deborah is a daring woman, I tell you. She's so daring. I would not even do that now. It's unlike today where women can join the Navy and the Army. Deborah did have some setbacks for her, but she went through all of those. Sadly, Deborah did get discharged from the Army because, well, she got found out by her general after she was wounded in a fight. Deborah was discharged from the Army on October 25th, 1783. But when she was discharged, she was given an excellent record of service. Can you believe that? I mean, no woman has ever gotten that kind of excellent record. So Deborah became a national sensation. She went over the 13 colonies and talked about her time in the Revolutionary War and what it was like to experience and be a soldier. She also gave a lot of hope for women and girls, or more freedom of doing things. So what does Deborah Samson have to do with Sharon? Well, Deborah Samson has a lot to do with Sharon, actually. After she was discharged from the Army, Deborah Samson went here to Sharon and lived here from 1813 to 1827. That's 14 years, and that's a lot of time to get to know your town. Deborah lived here with her husband, Benjamin Gannett, whom she married after 2 years or so after being discharged from the Army. This was a big thing for Deborah living in Sharon. She wasn't in her old place, and it was a different place for her. Now, another cool fact about Deborah and Sharon is that her house is still standing in Sharon. Something from the 1700s era is still standing in Sharon. Can you believe that? Isn't that crazy and mind-blowing? Her house is now owned by Mr. and Mrs. Archambault, as she is not there. It is still a working farm with cows and chickens and is still running. It's actually still standing and is in pretty good shape, believe it or not. The third fact I want to talk about with Deborah and Sharon is that Deborah actually went to a place in Sharon. It's called Cobb's Tavern. And Deborah went there to meet with Paul Revere to talk about her pension. Paul Revere is a more worldwide known figure. And fun fact about Paul Revere and Sharon, 2 of his bells that he made when he was a silversmith are actually hanging right here in Sharon. You may see them. Now back to Deborah. The last fact I want to talk about with Deborah and Sharon is Deborah was buried here at Sharon. She is buried at the Rockridge Cemetery. And no, she does not have a huge memorial dedicated to her or a huge hill just for her. It's actually a really small grave because it was still buried back there in the 1700s. She wasn't that important to the world. Deborah was buried with her husband and her daughters and sons. George Washington Gay, Deborah's grandson, was also buried there. He fought in the Civil War, not the Revolutionary War. Many people think that the huge monument on the hill, which belongs to George Washington Gay, is actually Deborah, but don't confuse that. It's really George Washington Gay, her grandson. So Deborah Samson and Sharon have a lot of history to do with each other. It's mind-blowing that happened, isn't it? I mean, a worldwide figure came to such a small town on the East Coast. Isn't it crazy? So the second point I want to talk to you about today is Lake Massapog and Man's Pond. Lake Massapog is very famous among us Sharons. We can go there for the beach, for swimming, and it's their Everwood Day Camp. But it's famous for more than just its swimming and diving. Lake Massapog has a lot of history, just like Deborah Samson and Sharon. Lake Massapog actually dated back to the Revolutionary War era, and people used it. There was iron ore at the bottom of the lake, which people used to make cannonballs and cannons. Then they used this to help the Americans fight against the British. Now, I don't think there's any iron ore. They probably used it all. I mean, they made a lot of cannons and cannonballs. But it's still a large piece of history that we need to know about. The second kind of thing I want to talk to you about today is my favorite part of this speech, the ice block process. The ice block process is a cool process that I want to share with you, and it was actually done here at Lake Massapog. The ice block process just goes like this. When the lake was completely frozen and solid over, basically people would go and drill holes in the ice, and water would come on top and form a new layer of ice. They would do this process over and over and over, maybe 100 times in fact. And when they were done, they would cut a block of ice out until they reached water, and they'd bring out one huge block of ice. Why did they do this? To refrigerate. People did not have refrigerators back then. There was not that kind of technology. That's why they used the ice block process. Now we have refrigerators, thank Lord. I would not want to be going out on a lake that is frozen and drilling. The last part of history I want to talk about with Sharon and Lake Massapog is the kosher hotels. The kosher hotels are not that important part of history, but it's still pretty cool to know. So Sharon was actually a vacation spot, believe it or not. Tourists love to come here with the clean air and the amazing scenery and it's a very good location. People used to come here where there were a lot of kosher hotels on Lake Massapog, and they used to go on ferry over Lake Massapog and see the wonderful scenery. So can you believe that a lot of people went over Lake Massapog in the olden days? So that's all about Lake Massapog. Now let's move on to Man's Pond. Man's Pond, there's a little less to talk about, but it's still amazing. Man's Pond was once a mill, and what was it Man's product? Duck fabric. It was called duck fabric because it was so thick and so strong that it was almost water repellent. And trust me, this was a little weird in the olden days when they had the mill. Now the mill's kind of burned down, which is really sad, but they have saved a couple of things from the mill, such as the stone sharpening mill, which is in the Sharon Historical Society. Duck fabric was made by the mill, which was obviously water-powered as it was by the pond. You can actually still see, if you go to Man's Pond, you can see a ledge with the water pouring down the ledge, and I think that was where the mill was located. It's very sad that the mill burned down. So that's all for Lake Massapog and Man's Pond. The third point I want to talk to you about today is the Sharon Historical Society. This Society is not huge. It's not even as big as this room, I think. It may even just be like this room. The Sharon Historical Society is located on School Street, and it was built in 1999 to look like a schoolhouse. The reason it was done like this was to show a little bit more of history on what it was like in the olden days. Basically, inside, you just see artifacts, artifacts, and artifacts. There are some things that actually belong to Deborah Samson that are in there. There are Deborah Samson's foot warmers and Deborah Samson's table and chair. Can you believe that they have preserved so much history in there? There is also the old stone sharpening mill from Man's Pond that was brought here after the mill burned down. Another thing that you can do inside the Sharon Historical Society is you can look at maps and you can see what Sharon was like in the olden days. There are many different things about it. There was once a water tower in Sharon that burned down, and the Congregational Church. Did you know that it burned down 3 times, and this is the 3rd building on that site? So those are the cool facts you will find inside the Sharon Historical Society. But there's also an outside part to the Sharon Historical Society. In the outside part, it's basically a carriage house. And in that carriage house, you will find so much of farming history. There's plows and axes and sickles and butter churners. There's a lot of butter churners there. And seed sowing machines. You will see what life was like back then for pilgrims and people before we had all this modern technology of tractors and other farming machines that we use today now to make farming easy. So that's the carriage house. And in the carriage house, one more thing that I want to share about that with you is that inside you will find a butter churner, and the butter churner takes forever. The process, it will take like a lot of hours it will take to make butter actually out of that machine. Basically, you just spin the handle, it just churns it, and you make butter. So that is not a good process. I do not want to be doing that all day long. I can't imagine what work and life was like for people back in those old days. So thank you, ladies and gentlemen, for listening to my speech on Sharon history. Today talks about 3 things. The first thing I talked about was Deborah Samson. The second thing I talked about today was Lake Massapog and Man's Pond, which we learned a lot about. Third, I talked about the Sharon Historical Society, which we learned also some more facts about. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen, and I want to think about your town. Easton, Taunton, Grafton, anywhere you live. Does it have history behind it? I never thought Sharon would be this cool. Just go to the internet and you can find so much. So thank you, ladies and gentlemen, for listening to my speech, and goodbye.